I want to start by asking you to do a few things. If you appreciate stories about competence being rewarded and arrogance getting its just desserts, hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And as you listen, if any of this resonates with you, if you've ever been made to feel like your experience was a liability instead of an asset, leave a comment down below. I read every single one. And of course, if you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell. My name is Felix, and for 20 years I was the head brewer at Iron Oak Brewery. More than that, I was its soul. The story of Iron Oak, the real story, didn't start with Arthur, the founder, a man I respected more than any other. It didn't start with the first bag of malt or the first pound of hops. It started with a living thing, a microscopic organism that I personally cultivated, nurtured, and perfected over 2 decades, our yeast. It was the most guarded secret in our entire operation, the very heart of our acclaimed founder's ale, and it was mine. The day it all ended was a Tuesday. It was sterile, clinical, and reeked of the kind of corporate cleansing that only someone with an MBA and a profound lack of understanding can orchestrate. I was called into the conference room, the one with the big polished oak table that Arthur and I had picked out together years ago. The grain of that wood held more history than the person sitting across from me. Her name was Kimberly, Arthur's daughter. She'd inherited the brewery a year after her father passed away. Where Arthur was all tweed jackets, calloused hands, and the constant faint smell of wort, Kimberly was sharp blazers, a permanently affixed Bluetooth earpiece, and the scent of expensive, aggressive perfume. She never set foot on the brew floor unless it was for a photo op. She looked at the fermentation tanks not as vessels of creation, but as assets on a balance sheet. Across the table she sat with a man from human resources I'd never seen before. He had the placid, unreadable expression of a professional executioner. Kimberly didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a thin folder across the table. My name was on the tab. She said, "Felix, we appreciate your years of service." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. But the company is moving in a new, more streamlined direction. We're looking to optimize our production pipeline and create a more consistent, scalable product. I just looked at her. I didn't open the folder. I knew what was inside. Streamlined? Scalable? I repeated the words. They tasted like ash in my mouth. What does that mean, Kimberly? The HR man cleared his throat. It means your position as head brewer has become redundant. Redundant. 20 years of my life. 20 years of getting up at 4 in the morning to check gravities, of nursing sick fermentations back to health, of sleeping on a cot in the brewery during punishing winter storms to make sure the temperature in the cellar never wavered, 20 years of building the reputation that she was now living off of, all of it redundant. Kimberly must have seen the flicker in my eyes because she put on a face that was meant to be sympathetic but came across as condescending. She said, "Look, Felix, you're an artist, a true craftsman. My father always said so. But we're a business now, a modern business. We can't have our entire brand dependent on one person's intuition. We've sourced a new yeast strain from a top-tier lab in Germany. It's a commercial pitch that models the ester profile of our house strain with over 97% accuracy. It's more stable, more predictable, and frankly more cost-effective." I nearly laughed. Nearly. 97% accuracy. She said it like she was reading a spec sheet for a new piece of software. She had no concept, not the slightest, that the 3% she was so casually dismissing was everything. It was the faint note of pear on the nose, the subtle clove finish, the creamy mouthfeel that no commercial strain could ever replicate. It was the soul. It was the reason every beer critic in the country had our founder's ale on their top 10 list. It was the reason we had a fan base so loyal they would drive 3 states to get a new seasonal release. She was taking a symphony and replacing it with a ringtone, and she was proud of it. I finally picked up the folder. I didn't open it. I just held it. I looked her dead in the eye. "You're about to launch the new marketing campaign, aren't you?" A flash of surprise. Yes, a massive one. It's centered on our history, our legacy. The tagline is "Iron Oak, the unchanged taste of tradition." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was breathtaking. She was going to gut the beer, replace its heart with a cheap, generic substitute, and then have the gall to sell it to the world as unchanged. She wasn't just firing me, she was trying to erase me. to claim my life's work as her own while simultaneously destroying it. The HR man started talking about my severance package, about a non-compete clause, about returning company property. I just tuned him out. My mind was reeling, but on the outside I was a statue. I learned a long time ago on the brew floor that panic is your enemy. When things go wrong, you don't run around shouting. You get quiet, you observe, you think. I asked one last question. And the yeast currently in the tanks? The generational pitches. What's your plan for those? Kimberly waved a dismissive hand. Oh, we'll just dump them after this cycle, start fresh with the new clean strain. No need to maintain all that complicated equipment you insisted on. Dump them. She was going to pour 20 years of living history down the drain. An organism I had named Helena after my grandmother was going to be treated like industrial waste. That was the moment. That was the instant that the shock and the hurt crystallized into something else. Something cold, hard, and patient. I stood up. I said, I understand. I signed the papers without reading them. I slid the folder back to the HR drone. I didn't take it with me. I didn't need their pittance of a severance to remind me of what they'd done. Kimberly looked relieved. She had expected a fight, an emotional outburst. She got nothing. My composure seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting match would have. As I walked to the door, she called out, Felix. No hard feelings, I hope. It's just business. I paused at the door, but I didn't turn around. I just said, the thing about brewing, Kimberly, is that it's never just business. The yeast always tells the truth in the end. And then I walked out. I walked past the photos on the wall of me and her father, Arthur, hoisting trophies at the Great American Beer Festival. I walked past the cellar where I could hear the familiar, gentle bubbling of the tanks, a sound that was as comforting to me as my own heartbeat. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that she had just made a catastrophic, legacy-destroying mistake, and what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that our yeast strain wasn't just unique, it was a one-of-a-kind organism that existed nowhere else on this planet, and the beer she was about to ship to thousands of loyal fans would taste absolutely nothing like the original. The first sip would tell them everything. She hadn't just fired her head brewer, she had killed her father's brewery. She just didn't know it yet. The drive home was a blur. The familiar roads of my town, roads I had driven in darkness and in light, at every hour of the day and night for 20 years, felt alien. It was like my entire world had been knocked off its axis by a few degrees, enough to make everything feel wrong. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, a brewer's hands, calloused and strong, but inside I felt a tremor. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound, hollowed-out sense of loss. It was grief. I hadn't just lost a job. I felt like I had lost a child. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside the house. I couldn't face my wife, Sarah, not yet. I couldn't bear to see the look in her eyes, that mixture of fury and heartache that I knew would be there. Instead, I walked around to the back of the house, to my workshop. It was more of a shed, really, but it was my sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust, old books, and faintly of yeast. In the corner, next to a workbench cluttered with tools and half-finished projects, was a small, unassuming laboratory-grade refrigerator. It hummed quietly, a sound only I would notice. I opened the door. Inside, nestled among vials of hop oils and neatly labeled petri dishes, was a single, small cryo vial. It looked like nothing, just a tiny plastic tube with a screw cap. The label, written in my own neat block handwriting, read Helena, Generation 1092, archived. I took it out. The vial was cold against my palm. This was it, the alpha and the omega. My personal, off-site, cryogenically frozen backup of the iron oak yeast strain. I had started the practice of keeping a private archive about 10 years ago, not out of malice or foresight of betrayal, but out of a brewer's paranoia. A power outage, a contamination, a cooler malfunction, any of those things could wipe out a house strain forever. It was my insurance policy for Arthur's legacy. Now it was something else entirely. It was the only living proof of what had been lost. Holding that vial, the memories came flooding back, not as a gentle stream but as a tidal wave. I thought of Arthur. When he hired me, iron oak was nothing. It was a failing business in a drafty warehouse with 3 leaky tanks and a mountain of debt. Arthur had the passion, the vision, but he wasn't a brewer. His first few batches were, to put it kindly, undrinkable. He hired me, a young ambitious kid from brewing school, with a handshake and a promise. He said, "Felix, I don't have much money to offer you, but I can offer you a playground, a laboratory. I want to make a beer that people will talk about 100 years from now. You help me do that, and a piece of this place will always be yours." A piece of this place will always be yours, a gentleman's agreement, the kind of thing that seems noble and profound at the time, but in the cold light of a corporate boardroom means absolutely nothing. It's one of those hard lessons. Loyalty is a human emotion. A corporation doesn't have the hardware to process it. We struggled for years. We were on the brink of bankruptcy more times than I can count. What saved us wasn't a business plan or a marketing gimmick. It was a trip I took back to my family's old farm, a place that had been sold off years ago but still held a corner of my heart. My grandmother, Helena, had been an avid gardener and a home baker. Her sourdough starter was legendary in our family. She had this old gnarled apple tree in the back, one that produced the sourest, most inedible apples you could imagine, but in the spring its blossoms were the most fragrant things in the world. On a whim, armed with a few sterile swabs and a cooler, I took samples from those apple blossoms. I had a wild idea, a long shot. Most wild yeasts are unusable for beer. They produce foul phenolic flavors, but I had a hunch. Back in my makeshift lab at the brewery, I started the painstaking process of isolating the different strains. It took months. I plated hundreds of cultures. Most of them were duds. They smelled awful, like rotten vegetables or burnt plastic. I was about to give up. Then, one morning, I came in and opened one of the last petri dishes. The smell wasn't foul, it was beautiful. It was clean, with a distinct aroma of ripe pear and a whisper of something spicy like clove. It was Helena. Taming her was another story. That took years. She was a wild thing, temperamental. Her fermentation profile was unlike anything I had ever read about. She needed a very specific, slow ramp-up in temperature. She was a glutton for certain amino acids and would stall out if the wort chemistry wasn't perfect. Her flocculation, the way the yeast clumps together and drops out of the beer, leaving it clear, was a nightmare. She would stay in suspension for weeks unless I roused her daily, a gentle agitation of the tank that I had to perfect by feel. I documented everything in a series of leather-bound journals, not on a company computer but by hand, page after page of detailed notes, temperatures to 1/10 of a degree, pH levels, nutrient additions, cell counts, and sensory notes. These journals weren't just data, they were the story of our relationship, mine and Helena's. They were a collaboration. Kimberly had the yeast in her tanks, yes, she had a few generations of a living culture, but a yeast strain is not static, it evolves, it drifts. Without the exact handling, the precise conditions I had chronicled in my journals, Helena would start to change. She would get stressed, and a stressed yeast produces off flavors. Within a few generations, she would mutate into something unrecognizable. Kimberly didn't have the yeast, she had a hostage, and she had no idea how to keep it alive. That's what Kimberly, with her MBA and her talk of scalable solutions, could never grasp. This wasn't an ingredient you could just order from a catalog. It was a partnership. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. The phrase echoed in my mind. Arthur used to say that. He said it about mechanics, about accountants, and about brewers. He understood that true value lay in knowledge and experience, the things that can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. I finally went inside. Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, a mug of tea steaming in her hands. She didn't have to ask. She saw it on my face. She just came over and wrapped her arms around me. I leaned into her, the full weight of the day finally crashing down on me. I felt the tremor start in my hands and spread through my whole body. She listened as I told her everything, the sterile meeting, the word redundant, the German yeast, the tagline for the new campaign. When I finished, her expression wasn't one of pity. It was a slow burning fire. "That woman," she said, her voice low and tight, "that woman has been living off your work, off Arthur's work, for a year, and she has the audacity to do this." She pulled back and looked me in the eye. "So what are you going to do?" I shrugged. "Do? There's nothing to do. I signed a non-compete. They paid me a severance. It's over." No, she said, her voice firm. It is not over. You are Felix. You built that place. You and Arthur. He knew it. I know it. Every single person who loves that beer knows it, even if they don't know your name. You are not going to let some trust fund kid with a business degree erase 20 years of your life. You are not going to let her destroy her own father's legacy and pin it on progress. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to Arthur. Her words were like a bracing tonic. She was right. My initial reaction was to retreat, to mourn, to let it go. But she saw what I hadn't allowed myself to see yet. This wasn't just an injustice, it was a desecration, and I was the only person on earth who could do anything about it. The resolve didn't come in a flash of anger. It settled in slowly, a cold, clear certainty. I wasn't going to fight them. I wasn't going to sue them. I wasn't going to engage in some petty war of words. That wasn't my way. My way was the way of the brewer. I would be patient. I would be methodical. I would control my process, and I would let the product speak for itself. Kimberly thought she was in control. She thought she had made a smart business decision, but she was operating in a world of spreadsheets and marketing jargon. I was operating in the world of biology, of chemistry, of time. She had a plan, but I had my journals. I had my allies, and in the small humming refrigerator in my workshop, I had Helena, the real Helena, and I was about to give her a new home. The days following my termination were strange. The world kept moving, but I felt like I was in a bubble of slow motion. For the first time in 20 years, my phone didn't ring at 5 a.m. with a question from the night shift cellarman. There were no temperature logs to review, no yeast counts to perform. The rhythms that had governed my life had vanished. It left a void, and in that void a plan began to form. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not in the traditional sense. I've always believed that revenge is a messy, emotional business. This was going to be an exercise in truth, a controlled experiment on a grand scale. My first call wasn't to a lawyer or a headhunter, it was to Marcus. Marcus had been my assistant brewer for the last 8 years. I'd hired him straight out of a viticulture program. He knew more about yeast health than anyone I'd ever met besides myself. He was quiet, diligent, and fiercely loyal. He saw brewing not just as a job, but as a craft. When I told him I'd been fired, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he just said, "What a mistake, what an unbelievable, catastrophic mistake." I told him to stay put, to keep his head down and just do his job. I said, "Marcus, I don't want you to risk your job, but I need you to be my eyes and ears. I need you to tell me what's happening on the inside. Tell me about the new yeast." It was a lot to ask. I was asking him to engage in a quiet act of corporate espionage, in a way, but I knew him. His loyalty wasn't to the new letterhead or the new CEO, it was to the beer. "Of course, boss," he said without hesitation. "They can't see the truth, but I'll watch it for you." My next step was to visit an old friend, a man named David, who was a patent and intellectual property lawyer. We met for coffee, not in his stuffy downtown office, but at a quiet cafe. I laid out the whole story, the handshake deal with Arthur, the 20 years of service, the creation of Helena, the firing, and my leather-bound brewing journals which I'd brought with me in a satchel. David listened patiently, his face impassive. When I was done, he took a sip of his coffee. "Felix," he said, "you have been both a genius and an idiot." I couldn't help but smile. "I'm aware of the latter." He opened one of my journals. He's not a beer guy, but he understands process and documentation. He ran a hand over the meticulous, handwritten notes. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is your leverage. This is not company property. You created this on your own time, in your own format. It contains trade secrets that are intrinsically tied to your personal, intellectual effort. They don't have a copy of this, do they?" "Not a single page," I confirmed. "And the yeast strain itself?" he asked. "Did you ever sign anything that explicitly assigns the intellectual property of that organism to the company?" "It was a handshake deal with Arthur," I said. "He called it Felix's Folly for the first year. The name Helena was my own. It was never formally named or documented in any company files." David leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. This is where a small, plausible inaccuracy of the corporate world worked in my favor. He said, "Their position is weak. Morally, it's a travesty. Legally, it's a fascinating gray area. They possess a living culture of the yeast, which they can argue is a company asset, but they do not possess the knowledge to maintain it. It's like they have a Formula One car, but they've fired the only driver and thrown away the owner's manual. He then looked at the non-compete agreement I'd been given. He scoffed. This is boilerplate nonsense. It was clearly drafted by an HR generalist, not a litigator. It prevents you from being an employee at another brewery within a 50-mile radius for 12 months. It says nothing about you being a founder. It says nothing about you consulting. It says nothing about you starting your own venture outside that radius. It's full of holes. They were so arrogant they didn't even bother to do it right. The severance was a pittance, barely 3 months' pay. David advised me to cash the check. Accepting it doesn't validate their flimsy non-compete. It just gives you operating capital. Let them think you're beaten. Let them think you've accepted your fate and moved on. The quiet man is always the most underestimated. Armed with that knowledge, I started the real work. I converted the spare bedroom in our house into a proper office and lab. I bought a new, more powerful microscope. I spent my days meticulously propagating a new, vibrant culture of Helena from the cryo vial. I was bringing her back to life. The process was slow, meditative. It was like reconnecting with an old friend. As the yeast cells multiplied under my microscope, my resolve hardened. I wasn't just cultivating a yeast strain. I was marshaling my forces. While I worked, the reports started coming in from Marcus. They were like dispatches from a slow-motion disaster. The first text came 3 days after I was fired. Boss, they pitched the German yeast yesterday. Kimberly and a sales rep from the supplier came down to the floor in lab coats. Total photo op. She called it the dawn of a new era of consistency. The smell is weird, like unripe bananas. I knew that smell. It was isomale acetate, a common ester produced by many commercial Hefeweizen strains. It was a pleasant enough aroma, but it wasn't Helena. It was the first sign that their 97% accurate model was a fantasy. A week later, another text. The fermentation is stuck. Gravity is way too high. It's sluggish. The text from the supplier told Kimberly to just rouse the tank and raise the temp. She has no idea what that even means. She just repeated it to the cellar crew. They're treating it like it's a generic lager strain. It's not working. Of course it wasn't. They were stressing the yeast. A stressed yeast doesn't just produce the wrong flavors, it produces the wrong everything. It can lead to diacetyl, which tastes like movie theater popcorn butter. It can produce fusel alcohols, which give you a headache before you even finish the glass. They weren't just making a different beer, they were making a bad beer. Meanwhile, I was making my own moves quietly. I didn't look for a new job. I began to build a new identity. I registered a name for a new company, Artisan Cellar Consulting. It was vague, professional. Then I started a blog and a social media presence under the same name. I didn't mention Iron Oak. I didn't mention my past. I just started writing. I wrote about the soul of beer. I wrote deep technical dives into the science of ester production. I wrote about the history of wild yeast capture, about the difference between a cultivated house strain and a sterile lab culture. I wrote about the philosophy of brewing, about the idea that the brewer is in a conversation with the yeast, not a dictator barking orders. I was putting my 20 years of knowledge out into the world. The posts were dense, nerdy, and deeply passionate. I expected maybe a few dozen people to read them. But a strange thing happened. The true beer geeks found me. The homebrewers, the cellar dwellers, the small batch artisans. My follower count started to grow. First hundreds, then thousands. People were sharing my posts in brewing forums and on social media. They were hungry for this kind of knowledge, the kind that had been scrubbed clean by corporate marketing. I was building an army without even realizing it. I was establishing myself not as a disgruntled ex-employee, but as an authority, a master of the craft. The climax of this first phase came with a phone call from Marcus. His voice was tense. Boss, it's a catastrophe. They did it. They filtered and kegged the first batch of Founder's Ale with the German yeast. We all tasted it off the bright tank. It's awful. It's thin. It has this weird, sulfury banana bubblegum thing going on. It tastes cheap. But the launch is in 2 weeks. Kimberly held a meeting. She said the flavor profile was within acceptable deviation and that the power of the brand would carry it. She's ordered it to be shipped. They're bottling and canning it as we speak. I felt a cold chill. She was actually going to do it. She was going to knowingly ship a defective, inferior product and slap the unchanged taste of tradition label on it. It was a level of cynical brand worship that I could scarcely comprehend. Legacy isn't just a word you put on a can. It's something you have to earn, day after day, batch after batch. I thanked Marcus for the information and told him to be careful. After I hung up, I sat in my new office, the gentle hum of my own small fermentation lab in the background. The trap wasn't something I had to set. Kimberly was setting it herself. All I had to do was make sure that when it sprang, the whole world was watching. My final move was to reach out to a man named Alistair Finch. Alistair was arguably the most respected beer critic in North America. He wrote for a major magazine and had a blog with a cult-like following. He was old school, brutally honest, and had a palate that could detect a single misplaced molecule in a 50-liter batch. He had given Iron Oak's Founders Ale its first 5-star review 15 years ago and had been a champion of our work ever since. We had developed a professional friendship over the years, built on a mutual respect for the craft. I emailed him. I told him I had left Iron Oak and was starting a new consulting venture. I attached a link to my blog. I said I would be honored if he would take a look at my work, and that I had a story to tell about the soul of brewing that I thought his readers would appreciate. He wrote back in less than an hour. "Felix, good to hear from you. Always wondered when you'd strike out on your own. Your blog is a masterclass. Let's talk tomorrow." The pieces were in place. Kimberly's flawed product was heading to shelves. My reputation as an independent expert was growing, and a powerful, respected voice in the industry was about to give me a megaphone. The silent, patient work was done. Now it was time for the first quiet move that would start the avalanche. The interview with Alistair Finch was my first real shot across the bow, and I aimed it carefully. We spoke for 2 hours. I never once mentioned Kimberly by name. I never badmouthed Iron Oak. I didn't have to. I took the high road, which, as it turns out, gives you a much better strategic vantage point. I talked about the philosophy of the house strain. I described it as a brewery's unique fingerprint, a living legacy passed down through generations of brewers. I used the metaphor of a family's sourdough starter, something that a commercial packet of yeast from a lab could never truly replicate. "You can't reverse engineer a soul, Alistair," I said, and I knew that line would resonate. Alistair, being the shrewd journalist he was, picked up on the subtext immediately. He asked, "Felix, this is all fascinating, but it feels deeply personal. Is there a reason you're so passionate about this specific topic right now?" It was the opening I needed. I said, let's just say I've seen a trend in the industry, a move towards optimization and cost-cutting that treats the core ingredients of a beer as interchangeable commodities. They believe a brand is a logo and a catchy slogan, but the real brand, the true legacy, is in the glass. And the customers, the people who really love the beer, they always know the difference. Their palates are more honest than any marketing campaign. Alistair published the interview a week before Kimberly's big launch. He titled it, "The Soul in the Slurry, a fired brewmaster on why your favorite beer might be about to change forever." It was a masterpiece of subtle insinuation. The article went viral in the craft beer world. It was shared in every homebrewing forum, every Reddit sub, every beer trading group on social media. My artisan cellar blog traffic exploded. I went from being a niche writer to a central figure in a brewing controversy overnight. People were connecting the dots. They knew I was the legendary longtime brewer from Iron Oak. Whispers started circulating. What was going on at the brewery? Why did Felix leave so suddenly? The stage was now perfectly set. The audience was primed, suspicious, and paying close attention. All that was left was for Kimberly to pull the curtain back on her masterpiece. Marcus was my real-time feed of the chaos. The day the new Founders Ale hit the shelves was a digital bloodbath. The first check-ins on the beer rating app Untappd were brutal. A beer that had consistently held a 4.8-star rating was suddenly getting 1s and 2s. The comments were scathing. What did they do to this? Tastes like dish soap and bananas. This is not Founders Ale. I've been drinking this for 10 years. This is an imposter. R.I.P. Iron Oak. You were good while you lasted. Corporate greed wins again. Did they fire Felix? This has to be it. The soul is gone. That last one was copied and pasted dozens, then hundreds of times. My name, which had been the brewery's best-kept secret for years, was now a rallying cry for its disgruntled fans. The hashtag Where's Felix started trending in our state. Marcus texted me screenshots from the internal company Slack channel. It was pure, unadulterated panic. Kimberly was in full damage control mode. At first, she was defiant. She posted a message to the team blaming a vocal minority of online trolls and a smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee. That was me, of course. She instructed the marketing team to double down, to push the unchanged taste slogan even harder, and to delete negative comments from their social media pages. It was like trying to patch a bursting dam with chewing gum. For every comment they deleted, 10 more appeared. Loyal customers were posting side-by-side photos of the old, slightly hazy, beautifully colored ale next to the new, paler, disappointingly clear version. They were analyzing it, dissecting it. Her attempt to control the narrative was only fueling the fire. Then came the calls, not to me, but to the brewery. Marcus told me the receptionist was in tears. Longtime patrons, people who had been members of their mug club since day one, were calling to cancel their memberships. Small, independent bottle shops that had championed Iron Oak for years were calling to return their cases. The biggest blow came 3 days into the launch. A man named Frank Peterson was the head of purchasing for the largest grocery chain in the state, a chain that accounted for nearly 40% of Iron Oak's distribution. Frank was an old-school guy. He and I had a relationship built on years of trust and countless samples shared in his office. He trusted my product. He didn't care about marketing. He cared about quality. Marcus was in the room when Kimberly took the call from Frank. He said he could hear Frank's booming, angry voice right through the phone. She had put him on speaker, a classic power move that had backfired spectacularly. "Kimberly, what in God's name have you done?" Frank roared. "I've got store managers calling me from all over the state. Customers are returning your beer. They're saying it's gone bad. I've got a pallet of Founder's Ale in my warehouse that I wouldn't sell to my worst enemy. You've got a brand crisis on your hands, and you're about to have a contract crisis with me." Marcus said. Kimberly went pale. She tried to feed Frank the same lines about online trolls and minor flavor deviations. Frank cut her off. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence, young lady. I've been selling beer since before you were born. I tasted it myself. It's swill. You know who I called after I hung up on my marketing director? I called Felix, just to see what he was up to, and he told me about his new consulting gig. A man like that doesn't just walk away. You pushed him out, didn't you?" She was stammering, unable to form a coherent sentence. Frank delivered the final blow. "You've got 1 week to fix this. Pull every last can and bottle of this garbage off my shelves. I'm not having my stores associated with this disaster. If you can't deliver the real Founder's Ale, the one Felix used to make, then our contract is void. We'll find another local brewery to fill that shelf space. I hear there are some talented people suddenly on the market." The call ended. The room was silent. Kimberly, according to Marcus, just stood there for a full minute, her face ashen. The carefully constructed corporate world she had built, a world of buzzwords and projections, had just collided with reality. And reality was a 50-year-old grocery buyer who trusted a brewer's handshake more than a PowerPoint presentation. The panic had now reached a critical stage. She was no longer dealing with angry nerds on the internet. She was dealing with a catastrophic financial fallout. The bedrock of her business was crumbling, and that's when my phone finally rang. The caller ID read, Iron Oak Brewery. I let it ring 4 times just to let the silence sit with her. Then I picked up. "Hello," I said, my voice calm and neutral. "Felix, it's Kimberly." Her voice was tight, strained, a world away from the cool, dismissive CEO who had fired me. "Kimberly," I said, as if surprised to hear from her. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" The power shift was palpable. It hung in the silence on the line. It was the moment a chess player realizes they've been in checkmate for 3 moves and just didn't see it. The exodus had begun. not with a dramatic walkout, but with a quiet, collective realization that the ship was sinking and the captain had drilled the holes herself. The first to officially jump ship was Marcus. He called me the evening after Kimberly's disastrous call with Frank, the distributor. His voice was steady, resolved. "Boss, I just gave my 2 weeks' notice. I can't do it anymore. I can't stand by and watch her burn the whole place to the ground. It's a circus. She's blaming everyone. The cellar crew, the marketing team, even her father's old suppliers, everyone but herself." "Are you sure, Marcus?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You have a steady job there." "It's not a job anymore," he said. "It's a wake. I'd rather be unemployed and have my integrity than take a paycheck from her." "So that consulting gig of yours, you looking to expand?" Two other senior brewers from the cellar team and the head of their quality control lab, a brilliant woman named Elena, whom I had mentored for years, quit the following day. They all contacted me. They didn't want a reference. They wanted to know what was next. My quiet little blog had become a lighthouse for the disillusioned. I hadn't poached a single person. I had simply become the alternative to incompetence. Talent, it turns out, is drawn to competence like a moth to a flame. This is what Kimberly could never understand. She thought loyalty could be bought with a paycheck, but in a craft, in a real, passion-driven business, loyalty is to the work, it's to the standards, it's to the person who upholds those standards. When she jettisoned me, she didn't just lose a brewer, she lost the center of gravity that held the whole operation together. Her phone call to me was a masterclass in desperation. First, she tried anger. "What did you do, Felix?" She spat into the phone. "This is sabotage. That blog, that interview. You planned this. You're trying to ruin me." I let her vent. I just listened to the panic coiling in her voice. When she finally paused for breath, I replied calmly, "Kimberly, I haven't said a single negative word about you or Iron Oak in public. I have simply been discussing the art of brewing, a subject I happen to know a great deal about. If people are drawing their own conclusions based on the quality of the beer you're shipping, that's not sabotage, that's market feedback." Her anger dissolved instantly, replaced by a pleading tone that was almost more insulting. Okay, you're right. Felix, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I need you back. Name your price. I'll double your old salary. Triple it. You can be president of operations, whatever you want. Just, you have to help me. You have to tell me how to fix the yeast." There it was, the desperate plea of someone who has finally realized they are out of their depth. She still thought it was a switch I could flip, a secret ingredient I could add. She didn't understand that the fix was 20 years of accumulated knowledge she had dismissed as redundant. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to sit in it. I wanted her to understand the vast, empty space where my knowledge used to be. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and even. "The problem isn't the yeast, Kimberly. It never was. The problem is that you don't respect it. You don't respect the process, and you don't respect the people who dedicated their lives to it. You thought my work was a line item you could cut. You thought legacy was a word you could print on a can." I paused, then delivered the line I had been holding on to for weeks. "Competence isn't cheap, Kimberly. You only find out its true price when you lose it." "But we can fix it," she said, her voice cracking. "I'll dump all the new stuff. We still have some of your yeast in the tanks. We can build it back up. Just tell me what to do." "Those tanks?" I said. "Helena is a sensitive organism. Without the proper feeding schedule, the right temperature curve, the things that are in my journals, the yeast you have left is already a shadow of its former self. It's already drifted. You probably have 4 or 5 new mutations in there by now, all of them producing off flavors. You don't have Helena anymore. You have a contaminated mess." I could hear her sharp intake of breath. The finality of my words was sinking in. She had no product. Her key distributor was about to walk. Her best people were gone, and her primary asset, the very thing that made her brewery special, was dead, and she had killed it. She made one last desperate gambit. She tried to threaten me. "You signed a non-compete, Felix. If I find out you're working with my people, I'll sue you into the ground." I almost laughed. "David, my lawyer, sends his regards. He found your non-compete to be charmingly amateurish. It's worthless, Kimberly. And as for your people, as you call them, they are free agents who have chosen to leave a toxic work environment. You have no claim on them." That was it. She had nothing left, no carrots, no sticks, just the ruins of her own making. I said, "I have to go, Kimberly. I have a new batch of yeast to attend to," and I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I just gently ended the call. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a power shift so total, so complete, that it needed no exclamation point. The final act of the drama played out without me even being in the room. That, to me, was the most satisfying part. My victory wasn't won in a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. It was the inevitable result of natural consequences, a chain reaction I had started simply by being true to my craft. A week after my call with Kimberly, Frank Peterson, the distributor, made good on his threat. He officially terminated Iron Oak's contract, citing a breach of their quality assurance clause. Losing that contract was like pulling the keystone out of an arch. It wasn't just the lost revenue, it was the public humiliation. The story was picked up by a regional business journal. The headline read, "Iron Oak loses largest distributor amidst quality control crisis." The article mentioned the departure of a long-time respected head brewer and a subsequent disastrous change in their flagship product's recipe. The dots were now connected for the entire business community to see. The Iron Oak Board of Directors, a group of passive investors who had been happy to cash checks during the good times, was suddenly paying very close attention. They had an emergency meeting. Kimberly, I later heard, tried to blame me, tried to spin a story of industrial sabotage, but the board wasn't stupid. They could read a balance sheet. They saw the plummeting sales, the voided contract, and the mass exodus of their most critical technical staff. 2 days after that meeting, a small, terse press release was issued. Kimberly was stepping down as CEO, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. It was the most sterile corporate execution imaginable. She was gone. The arrogant MBA who thought she could streamline a soul had been herself made redundant. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The board, having no one with the technical knowledge to save the brand, sold the company for pennies on the dollar to a massive, soulless beverage conglomerate, just as I had predicted. The new owners gutted the place. They shut down the original brewery, laid off the remaining staff, and moved production of Founder's Ale to a massive factory in another state. It was now just another generic mass-produced beer, a hollow brand name slapped on a can of yellow, fizzy water. Arthur's legacy, the one Kimberly had claimed to be protecting, was now well and truly dead. But a legacy isn't tied to a building or a name, it's a living thing, and Helena was very much alive. While Iron Oak was collapsing, my new venture was rising from its ashes. With the core team of Marcus, Elena, and the other brewers, we formed a new company. We pooled our savings. I took out a second mortgage on my house. It was a huge risk. But then Frank Peterson called me. "Felix, my friend," he boomed over the phone, "I find myself with a significant amount of empty shelf space where a certain premium ale used to be. I hear you're starting something new. If you can guarantee me the quality you've always delivered, I can guarantee you a purchase order that will make your bank manager very, very happy." That purchase order was our key. With it, we secured a small business loan. We didn't buy a big fancy facility. We leased a modest space in an industrial park on the other side of the county line, well outside the radius of Kimberly's toothless non-compete. We bought used equipment, stripping it down and rebuilding it ourselves. We worked 16-hour days, fueled by pizza, coffee, and a shared sense of purpose. We named our new brewery Helena Ales. It was a tribute to my grandmother, and a quiet nod to the true source of our magic. Our flagship beer, the very first thing we brewed, was made with the pure, vibrant culture of Helena that I had so carefully nurtured. We called it Founder's Legacy. When the first batch was ready, the team gathered around the bright tank for a tasting. I pulled a sample. It was beautiful. The perfect color, the perfect aroma. I poured a glass for everyone. We all raised them. No one said a word. We just smelled it. That familiar, beautiful scent of pear, honey, and a hint of clove. It was the smell of home. It was the smell of vindication. We launched 6 months after I was fired from Iron Oak. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Alistair Finch, the critic, wrote a glowing review calling Founder's Legacy a triumphant return to form for one of America's great brewers. The old fans of Iron Oak, the ones who had been so betrayed, flocked to us. They were our evangelists. Our first run sold out in a week. I found my new throne not in a fancy corner office, but on a simple stool on the brew floor, watching the gauges on a fermentation tank, a clipboard in my hand. I was back where I belonged. I wasn't the president or the CEO. My title was the same as it had always been, head brewer. We were smaller than Iron Oak had been. We were leaner, but we were ours. Every pipe, every tank, every drop of beer was a testament to our work, our standards. We had created a new workplace reality, one built on respect for the craft, not on spreadsheets. One afternoon, a few months after our launch, I was standing on the loading dock, watching a truck being filled with kegs of our beer. Marcus came and stood next to me. We watched in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know," he said, "I heard Kimberly is working for some tech startup in California now, in marketing." I nodded. "I hope she's happy," I said, and I meant it. My fight had never been with her, personally. It was with her philosophy. The idea that experience is disposable, that quality is negotiable, that a soul can be synthesized. Marcus grinned. "Yeah, I'm sure their synergy is off the charts." We both laughed. It was a good, clean laugh. The laugh of men who were tired, overworked, but deeply, profoundly content. The silent takeover was complete. The power had shifted. And the best part was, all I really had to do was my job. The rest just took care of itself. So here I am, not in a boardroom, but in my brewery. I can smell the sweet scent of boiling wort. I can hear the gentle hum of the glycol chillers. This is my world, and I control it. The story I just told you, it's not really about beer. It's about value. It's about knowing your worth when the world, or at least a new boss with a fancy degree, tries to tell you that you have none. They thought I was just an old-timer, a relic from a bygone era, too set in my ways. They thought my knowledge was obsolete, something they could easily replace with a newer, shinier, cheaper version. What they failed to understand is that legacy isn't something you can inherit like a piece of furniture. It's not a brand you can buy. It is a living thing. It's built day by day through dedication, through passion, and through a deep, unshakable respect for the work itself. They tried to erase my 20 years of work, but they only managed to erase themselves. My story is a testament to a simple, universal truth. You can't fake competence. You can't market your way around a bad product. And you can't replace the institutional knowledge of a dedicated veteran with a spreadsheet and a condescending attitude. The foundation of any great enterprise isn't the building or the logo. It's the people who show up every day and pour their souls into the work. It's the quiet experts, the veterans, the people who know the system not because they read a manual, but because they built it. For anyone out there who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you were redundant, let my story be a reminder. Your experience has immense value. Your knowledge is your power. Don't let anyone who hasn't walked in your shoes tell you what your work is worth. Sometimes the greatest power move is to simply step aside and let the machine they think they can run on their own grind to a halt. The silence of your absence will be louder than any argument you could ever make. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd ask you to do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And please leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you saw competence win out over arrogance. I want to build a community here, a place where we can share these stories of vindication. And finally, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories about getting the last laugh. Until next time, know your worth.